I'll wait a minute.
I enjoy the images in the paper.
Yes, the images are nice, isn't it? All right, guys, let's get started. About an hour ago, we covered the paper UNet. If you remember, UNet was made up of basically something that resembled an encoder-decoder architecture with residual connections in between, isn't it? Now, between the time 2015 and 2022 or 2021, what happened in between? What were some of the bigger discoveries? Come again? Exactly, attention got discovered. So what people did, and so what this builds upon are ideas of attention, and attention is heavily used. So glide is essentially that process. And remember, we talked about super resolution, taking a blurrier image to infill it with more details. So that brings us now in the direction of diffusion models. I'll explain what a diffusion model is. So 3 core ideas we'll use: diffusion, or rather reverse diffusion, attention, and UNet. And when you get these ideas, basically get it. And in some sense, I won't just do glide. I will do the broader thing, the latent diffusion models itself, in a continuous, because I don't think that at this moment, many of you are reading the paper, so I might as well explain all of them together. Right? So the ideas are beautiful, they're simple, fortunately, to grasp, but they're really elegant ideas. So let's pay attention to it. So we will put 3 things together. A, diffusion process. Diffusion. B, diffusion models. Secondly, UNet, which we just covered. C, attention. Right? Attention are transformers. So let me go over them one by one. What is the easiest is attention. What is attention? Suppose I give you text. Or let's just say, next to a lake, right? In moonlight. What is it? It's a statement, isn't it? It's a sentence. There is a, let's say that there is a house next to a lake in moonlight. And there will be, each word will be paying different amounts of attention to different other words. Okay? And that brings us to the self-attention equation, that if each token, Ti gets broken up into Ki, query I, and value I. Key is like the location, the coordinates of it. Value is the actual value, and query is when you're looking at the word, a house, how much attention should it be paying to other words? Right? So you do that by k.q. So let's say q.k, I would rather say, given a query vector qi, kj, vj, right, up to a, if you remember, there's a softmax, which you can, for the time being, not pay too much attention to this, the subtleties, but basically, query aligns with which of the token keys locations, right? And based on how similar it is to each of the keys, you pick a proportionate amount of value. That is roughly speaking what you're saying, isn't it, guys? Yeah. So that is your attention, or rather self-attention part. So attention we know. So given a sentence, we can break it up into tokens. So you will have tokens, T0, T1, Tn, and then of course the last CLS token, right, which will have attentions going to all the other tokens. That is that. UNet, just to recap, what was the UNet architecture? You had convolation and deconvolution using transpose convolutions, right? And then data would be going through this journey, but you also did skip connections. Why did you do skip connections? To bring in the context, whereas the forward journey would capture more of the essence of the features in the data, the convolutions. So that was the UNet. Now comes the interesting thing. First enhancement. While you are busy with UNet, why not throw in, because it's for good measure, some attention units in between? It will make the unit even better, right? If you remember in the neural architectures we showed, the moment you add attention units, attention heads in between, generally you get more focus, more semantic thing, because now each part knows how much attention to pay to other parts and so on and so forth. So that's the attention part of it. You throw in some attention. Like that. Then here comes the interesting part you do. You took this sentence, you pass it through a transformer, this token, there is a house next to a lake in moonlight, right? And you pass it through a transformer. Let's more specifically the encoder part of the transformer embedding. And what do you get? You get your token vectors, V1, V and VCLS. So I'll just mark it as this. These things came out of it, and then the CLS came out of it, isn't it? Those final vectors, attention vectors came out of it. And now what you do is something, and now comes the diffusion part that we need to understand. We know that we have two things. We have the UNet that is amplified or augmented with attentions. We also have a transformer through which we normally put text and get attention vectors. Now comes, now how do we bring all these ideas together? That's the part about glide. We'll do that now. So we need to first understand what is diffusion. See, you take a picture. Oh, I like this, robots meditating in a Vipassana retreat. How many of you have been in a Vipassana retreat? One of you, only one. Okay, worth going to, it's good. So it's funny. Okay. So a Corgi wearing a red bow tie and a purple party hat. Okay. So now what you do is, suppose you have this picture. Some picture. What picture should it be? Let it be a house, because house is something I actually still know how to draw. And let's give it a chimney. Right? There is smoke coming out of that little cottage. And give me a moment, guys. Guys, please follow this argument very carefully. Okay. Now, how diffusion models work, or that's latent diffusion models work, is very, very interesting actually. Suppose, and by the way, I'm going to mix up the glide and the whole full picture a little bit because it's worth doing that. Suppose I inject Gaussian noise into it. What does it mean to inject Gaussian noise? For every pixel, right, Pi, suppose I add a Gaussian noise. What is Gaussian noise? It's value I jitter it a little bit, shake it up a little bit. So if it is dark red, now it will be a little, it would be reddish, but maybe a little less red. Now, if it was not green at all, the little bit of green has come in, right? So I jitter it up a little bit. So now what will happen when you introduce it, it will look a little noisy picture of the image. So you get a noisy plus Gaussian noise, we'll get a noisy house. Let's say I mark the noisy house like this. And I just will add some noise. You can still sort of see this, right? So this is step one, this is step 0, step 1 image. I repeat the process, more Gaussian noise. Right? Add more Gaussian noise. And then it will become a picture that is much more noise. And maybe there is some outline of a house. Right? And I keep doing this till after k steps. All you see is you can't figure out perceptually where the house is. Generally, if k is equal to infinity means all information is lost. In reality, you don't run it infinite number of times. Practically, what happens is it loses information rather rapidly. Right? You go and do that. By the time you run through even like, I don't know, 64 iterations or something, you'll begin to see a huge difference. And by the time you run it through a couple of 100 times, or a few 100 times, or 1,000 times, it begins to look very, very hard to tell where exactly the house is, right? Unless you are a little bit drunk. Right? So this is the process of diffusion, the forward process of diffusion. Are we together? Now comes, why in the world would I do that? Why in the world would you lose information? And there comes the reverse part. See, you realize, first of all, there's something interesting about it mathematically. First is that it's a Markov process. That's a big word. What is a Markov process? Amrit? Yes, history is lost. So the picture that you get here, let me call this step 2. The picture of step 2 is derived from picture of step 1. And it doesn't matter how you came to step 1, that picture, right? It has no relationship to the original picture. Do you see that? So an example is a drunken man. So suppose you are very inebriated. Today is Saturday night, right? So some of you do look a little bit Saturday evening. So I can see the effects. Are there in your backpacks little bottles? Who knows? So, okay. So what happens is, suppose you're deeply drunk and you're walking home, but you have no idea which way the home is. So at any given moment, you make a step, you end up somewhere, but you have totally lost orientation. So the next step you take and where you end up with depends only on where you started with, like your previous position, isn't it? From the previous position in 180 degrees or 360 degrees, you could have taken a step in any one of those directions. But you realize that where you land up in the next play after one more step has some relationship to the where you were now, because it will be in the vicinity of that place, but has no relationship to anything in the past. You have no memory of that. Right? So that drunken man's random walk is your Markov process in a way. Right? So I trust you all have a guilty look on your face. So this looks very familiar. Okay. Okay, so there you go. Now, is there a way to reverse it? Is the question. And that is the insightful question to ask. Diffusion process is okay, from information to noise. But if you make this as tiny steps, you could argue that if I take a perfectly clear picture and I add a little bit of noise, surely I should be smart enough to filter that noise out. Does that make sense, guys? Right? Are we getting it? So I should be able to, or how could we do it? Amongst other things, I could use super resolution, or I could use UNet or something like that to just infer the noise mask. Right? So suppose I could do this. I could say, let me call this A, B, C, all that. So suppose I know that B is equal to A plus noise, right? A Gaussian noise, and 1. Some noise we have added to the pixels. And suppose you trained a network, you take your UNet, so let me make it as UNet like this. Would that be better? Just to remind you, it's not just encoded with the residual connections, skip connections, it's a UNet. Right? Suppose you give it B, and you say, learn the reverse diffusion process. Namely, what you need to produce is noise. Noise, the noise mask. Now that's very interesting. You're deliberately not asking it to learn the cleaner image. Right? You're not saying, give me A. You could have, but you're instead saying, tell me what noise did you find? What is the Gaussian noise that you find sort of embedded in B? Are we together? So suppose you find that noise mask here, right? Let me just call this the noise mask. Then what you could do, you would argue that A is B minus the noise mask. Would you agree? Right, because ultimately that's what it is. Right, I could recover that. Am I making sense? And usually what you do is, you do it a little bit, say in latent models, while this makes logical sense, what you do is, you play it very, very carefully. You don't trust this learning completely, right? How would you learn this? Your standard unit, you train the neural network and blah, 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 you get it. We have done that now. What you could do is you just subtract a little bit of the noise. So you don't strive to get back the perfect image, right? But you just want to make a small step in the right direction. Go ahead.
In each iteration, are we adding the same noise mask?
No,
or it's a
different. And at each stage, you want a unit to learn to unmask or undo or learn the noise mask that has been added. Interestingly, you're not asking it to learn the original picture, but because noise has a well-defined shape, isn't it? It's Gaussian, it's bell curved. Right? So irrespective of whether it was a cat or a dog or a horse or a house, noise is noise. It has a bell curve distribution, and you're asking you to determine that. Go ahead.
But this noise is random.
It's random, but of a shape, not purely random. It's a Gaussian random normal. Right? So the pixel, the values, if you plot the deviations from 0, they will show a bell curve distribution.
So yeah, the model knows.
Model knows that, right? So you can do that. You say, that sounds like fun. We are up to something. So you can take, so if you just assume that a picture has been converted to less of a picture to all the way to pure noise, then I could use the reverse process, reverse diffusion process. Theoretically, to get back to some approximation of the original, step by step. Right. The trouble is, if you end up with pure noise, it's a little bit hard to recover the whole thing. You need some guidance. In other words, that random, complete pure noise, I could have shaped it into a dog, or I could have shaped it into a house, or I could have shaped it into a rocket. Isn't it? By different ways of eliminating the noise. So we need something to prompt it in the, just nudge it into the right direction. So the way I look at it is this way. See, when you take noise, in it, you can imagine some structure, right? And there's an infinite number of structures that you can imagine that it has. And by selectively taking different noise masks out of it, you can sort of impose the structure, because a reversal, you take some structure, add noise, and then you're sort of taking it out. All that the network is learning is some things don't make sense and some things do make sense. Right? For example, if the network has only seen digits, then it will always create a noise mask that if you subtract from that, sort of digits will begin to gradually appear, because those are the only real informative shapes it knows, isn't it? So it will gravitate towards those final states. So now comes the idea. So now we come to, so now that you know the diffusion process, let's try to get smart and see what Glide does. Glide was very interesting actually, because before that came DALI, which was based on GPT models, purely creative models, which shook the world, but it could create a carrot on a radish taking a dog for a walk or something like that, right? But it couldn't create very photorealistic images. So what this thing does is it says, let's put these three ideas together: diffusion model, UNet, and of course, it would be a criminal offense to do anything without a transformer thrown in somewhere there, and attentions thrown in somewhere there, isn't it? It's the new world of attentions and transformers. So let's put all these ideas together. And when you do that, what you get is, now come back to it. We have attention, we have transformers, converting a text into this prompt for guidance, text to guide it, nudge its way towards some object, some shape. Now what you do is, what is paying attention to what? What you do is you make this attention layers pay attention to each of the tokens, like have all sorts of complicated things sitting there, right? And what you do is, when you have all these attention heads paying attention to all your transformers tokens, the text token, what happens is it becomes a text guided reverse diffusion. Do you see that? Right? It becomes a text guided reverse diffusion. Now, one thing to remember, guys, that, and this is something people tend to get wrong, that in the reverse diffusion, right, whatever noise mask you discover, you don't just subtract the whole of it. Subtract a little part of it, because you never truly fully trust the noise mask, because you do it slowly, very slowly, and because it's a guided process over and over again, the text keeps prompting, because you just removed a little bit of noise, some outline emerges, and again you pay attention to the text. And again something emerges, and again you pay attention to a bit more text. Are you getting it? So there's a lot of continuous focusing. What are you asking me to make? Ah, a house by a lake in moonlight, right? So that continuously, it's like an echo chamber. You keep hearing the sound over and over and over again, metaphorically speaking, as you go through the process of reducing the noise. So what does it do? It forces the neural network to sort of bring out shapes that somehow resonates with this. Making sense? Right. And now comes the approaches that this talks about. One is sort of a clip-based approach. Let me talk about that. So suppose, look at this. Clip-based approach is sort of an ablated steady kind of approach. See, suppose I gave it noise and I said, okay, come up with something. What would it do? It would reverse it into and produce you something. For all you know, it might produce you not a house by a lake in moonlight, but it may produce you a tractor. And say, well, what a splendid job I did. I produced a tractor. Isn't it? Now, on the other hand, if you do voice guided, text guided, then it might come up with something. So how do you make sure that what it produces is really trustworthy and aligns with the text that you do? There are two sort of approaches you can do. One is obviously this, guide it with the text as we did, because without guiding it with text, it could produce God knows what, isn't it? So the other way you could do it is, there are two approaches. Approach number one, clip guided. What is clip guided? What you do is, you have this text, right? A house by a lake in moonlight. Now, what have we been using clip for, guys? Do you remember? To create caption images, but also what does it do? What does the clip thing ultimately produce? It's a model that produces what? A sentence embedding, a sentence vector, isn't it? So this text, this sentence, S will produce a vector S. Are we together? Now, suppose you go through this guide, like this process, keep on doing it, and you end up with a picture that sort of has a house by a lake. Here is my lake, and here is my moon. Does it look reasonably realistic, guys? Here we go. Right? So here is my house by a lake in moonlight. Now I can convert, clip does what? Clip converts an image also into a vector. So this will be the vector embedding of the output image, right? And now what can I do? I can ask myself during inference that, hey, by the way, these two vectors better be close together. Force them to be, so produce that image, because even at inference time, you deliberately shape the image generation to bend towards that image, which is close to the embedding vector, sentence embedding of the text, embedding vector of the text, so that the score or the similarity score, clip similarity score between the output and the sentence, the input sentence, the prompt is high, right? You could do that, isn't it? And therefore, you not only don't trust the decoding process, like, the prompting process, the transformer during the image generation, but you, on top of that, also bring in the power of clip. So I brought in two powers, isn't it? You not only trust the standard attention mechanism of the transformer, but you brought in the contrastive loss kind of thing. And so now, guys, I hope you're getting a sense of why I started this entire workshop bootcamp with, what did I start the bootcamp with? Sentence encoding, right? Because you see it appear again and again as a helper. Right? So that is one way of producing an image. There is actually another way to produce a better image, which they found to be useful. They asked this question. It's sort of an ablation study kind of a thing. Suppose this sentence was empty. I take two scenarios in which the guiding sentence is just empty versus the guiding sentence is a house next to a lake in moonlight. Now what happens? You would imagine that if you don't give it anything, it will produce some image, random, something it will produce, not as good. Whereas if you guide it, it will produce, through attention mechanism, a much better image. Would you agree? Right. So now think about it as vector space arithmetic. The idea is very beautiful and simple. Suppose here is the picture. Here it is with text, with prompt. Prompt guided. So when this image you encode, it becomes this vector, right? And suppose you produced an image which was without any guidance whatsoever, some image, no word, no words. Now, what can you tell about this journey from here to here? As you go from this blue vector, actually, let me change the color. If you pick any point here, if you take this vector, let me call this vector A, this B, what can you say about vector C? Would you say vector C is at least better than vector B? Right? Because it's in the direction of the right thing. What about vector D? Even better? A is of course better than both C and D. And here comes the funny part. What about vector E? It is even more in the direction of the meaning of the sentence, isn't it? Does that make sense? And so one way that you could generate good images is actually at each stage, given the voice prompted image, from that, you find this difference, this gap. And you instead, this amount, you instead go in the opposite direction. Take this vector and you produce this vector. I need a lovely new color. Then you produce this vector, you produce this vector, right? Which is basically this vector that you learned, which was the gap between this vector that you learned, which was the gap between B and A, the difference, added back to A to produce E. You see that? It will make the picture even more realistic, hopefully, or align with the text prompt that you gave. Does that make sense, guys? And that is glide. There's a second method of glide. It turns out that that is actually more effective. It's just vector arithmetic. You see how simple it is. So in case you have forgotten your vectors, now might be a good time to learn it, because machine learning is all just vector arithmetic. A lot of it is just vectors, probability theory, vector transformations, calculus.
I'm taking a question, Asif.
Go ahead.
So I kind of at a very high level, I think I appreciate very well like what you're trying to say. But let's assume that we take house, lake, and moonlight, right?
Yeah.
There's a proportion to it, and there is an order in which it has to appear, right? Say, suppose I say that I want the moonlight shadow to be on the lake and my house has to be in the background versus my house has to be in the foreground. So the way that those three proportions it will try to make it close would be from its prior memory of whatever the clip it has taken, and three things it will try to put together, right? How will it put it in the right proportion?
No, because of the image embedding, in a way, see, the text, because of the contrastive laws, right? When you say the house is in the background, right? And I only see its reflection in the water, you're using words that mean something. And that semantic vector will give you, basically what that will give you is, let me use a different color. I'll use green.
So are you saying that if I give a more detailed sentence, that painting will be different than just
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, try that actually. When you change the sentence, and the more, if your new sentence is semantically more informative, your picture will change.
I see. But it should have seen those things prior, right? I mean, like at least the proportions of it.
No, it doesn't.
Moonlight, it needs to know lake and house, correct?
That is right. By being trained on millions and millions of pictures, or hundreds of millions of pictures, it knows all about houses and lakes and moonlights.
So I was playing with the lion data and I asked a dog chasing a bird. It only showed me one picture out of all the 400 million.
But that is because it's the only picture that landed close. 400 million, believe it or not, is a minuscule data set. Remember, we are talking of a 1,000 dimensional space.
Uh-huh.
In a 1,000-dimensional space, what is a 4 million? It does not even qualify as a state debt.
No, 400 million.
It's not
Right?
billions or
No,
trillions.
400 million I meant. Sorry.
400 million is, I'm joking.
Yeah.
400 million is a minuscule number.
I see.
So if you give it a data set to search for, because you're doing image retrieval, even though it knows the meaning, it may not be able to find a good match for you in just 400. You need to give it a data set to search for in a few billion, because a dog chasing a bird is not as common an event. Imagine try to take a picture of a bird, a dog chasing a bird. It's an extraordinarily hard picture to take. And for that reason, there are not that many pictures available of that.
But if I ask it to create that, it will create, correct?
It will create it very
dog.
yes.
It knows a dog, it knows a lake, and it would know a bird. And it will try to put these three things together in the image format, correct?
It will do that. And in fact, that's a paradox. The amazing paradox is, in a way, while it may not be able to find an image that matches your criteria, because such an image may not exist in your minuscule data set of 4.
Hello?
Just froze.
Did he freeze or I froze? He froze.
I think Asif froze.
So how do we thaw him now?
It was, oh, he dropped out. I think he will have to rejoin. Post a quick message on Slack. Okay, hopefully he will be back soon.
I was seeing some of the capabilities of GPT-4.
Ah, yeah.
And it can guide you through an entire servicing of machine parts and things like that.
That's nice.
So it does image and basically context. So if you are a mechanic and you can take pictures of it and say, what do I do next? And so it can give you a sequence of steps. It's quite scary.
Oh, that sounds like looking up YouTube videos and how to do repairs.
Yeah, but I don't know how it is able to figure it out. So that's
Maybe it's accumulated all the YouTube tutorial knowledge.
I don't know where all this is going.
Kate, I'm assuming this was the last session, right? Or the last paper?
Yes, I believe so. Well, it was the three things that are going to be. Oh, there are connections. Asif is trying to log back in. So there's three things he was, three papers he was going to cover: the UNet, the glide, and then the latent diffusion. And I believe he was covering kind of a combination. Harini is urging us to wait. Yeah, because generally we at least go through till 5 to cover the paper readings, right? So hang tight for a little longer.
I think he keeps his machine on and that Zoom, something, there's probably a memory leak in his, that whatever the notepad or the Windows thing he has. I think that's why.
Yeah, I know I stopped trying to run Jupyter notebooks during a Zoom session because it would freeze my machine up too much. So it's like just focus on the Zoom connection.
Kate, a quick question for you, more on logistics side. If you are
Sure.
having a Zoom session, can you, Simon, how do you do the YouTube live, given that a session is going on the Zoom side?
I've been used to taking the Zoom recordings and posting those on a Google Drive to save them. Kicking off the YouTube live streaming, it's kind of a new thing that I've seen Asif enabling. We saw him like use a persona and do that part, but it looks like the streaming can continue even if the Zoom session continues, even if the person who kicked it off, the host like Asif, does not. So apparently it's still recording. Oh, there he is.
All right, folks, I'm back. I apologize. I have no idea what happened, but
Technology.
yeah, technology. The rebooting seems to have helped. So, where am I? Let me share my screen again. I hope I'm sharing it.
Yes.
And the basic, so guys, the idea is that you train a network to become very good at converting basically Gaussian noise into a shape that is semantically equivalent to the text that you give, prompt that you give, right? So look at how well it does, like Glide does. The results are actually very, very impressive. Now, look at this, a hedgehog using a calculator. I don't know about, I've never seen a hedgehog use a calculator, but it seems pretty realistic. A Corgi wearing a red bow tie and a purple party hat. Now, robots meditating in a Vipassana retreat. So now this is a very obscure one, if you notice, unless you know what Vipassana retreats are. How many of you know what it is? Only one person in the background. Okay. So these are Buddhist meditation retreats. You're supposed to be completely quiet. And a whole lot of people, they get absolutely crazy at the very thought of being quiet. Right? They can hardly be quiet for 1 hour, far from 10 days. So this is it. Then, so you can see that these robots are totally quiet. A fall landscape with a small cottage next to a lake. Oh, this reminds me of my life upstate near the Canadian border. So, but while it is very impressive, do you notice something? The prompts have to be very evocative. Semantically, they have to have rich content. Isn't it?
I mean, even the style is transferred, right? Like you can see the different Starry Night or Salvador Dali, right?
Yes, exactly. A surreal dreamlike oil painting by Salvador Dali of a cat playing checkerboard, right? And it gets more and more interesting. A painting of a fox in the style of Starry Night. By the way, what was Starry Night? Do you guys remember?
Van Gogh.
Van Gogh, yes, Van Gogh's painting. That's that. So it has figured even that out, and it knows what the Starry Night painting is. Yeah. At this moment, I would say that is when you, at least I begin to feel foolish next to one of these AI models.
So Asif, a question for you. Is this like if somebody questions this, like why it did that, are people able to go and explain and say that this is how this painting was generated and give it fully explainable, or this is still yet a mystery?
No, it is not a mystery. Actually, let's look at this painting of a fox in the style of a starry night. When you say starry night, it pretty much knows what you're referring
Yes.
to. You can do an image encoding of the starry night vector, right? And the painting of a fox in the style, you can pretty much see that it will guide it to something like that. So this is actually, given the prompt and given how this algorithm works, it's about as interpretable as it gets. If you know, the details are in the process.
So I was looking at it from, say, different domains, right? Like if you want to give a solution for a different domain, which is not a painting or this, and you have the prompt and then you see the end result of it, can
Yeah.
you down into the building blocks and say, hey, this part of it contributed to this portion of the solution and something like that, where you have a chain of events, chain of thought processes that you bring together and say, this is why we think this is the right solution for whatever we are trying to do.
Sort of yes and no. Let's just say that it's sort of vaguely interpretable, but not absolutely interpretable. Like many things you can't be too sure of.
So the
Like, for
ability
example, why is
cannot
this
be done.
fox having such a huge tail?
Uh-huh.
Right? Van Gogh never painted a fox with such a ginormous tail. Right? So not everything is clear, and some things are just artifacts of the model. If you think about it, so long as it is looking foxy enough, the gradient descent and the learning in that area won't matter so much anymore. Isn't it? In the image generation process, stage by stage, as you are trying to create super resolution images aligned with the prompt, it will stop improving at some point. So something has to tell it that this fox is not really realistic, right? The tail looks bigger than the fox itself, isn't it? So you literally see the weakness in this image. And this is what was true, by the way, with all of these, right? If you look carefully, you would see some artifact that shows that the process is not perfect. I don't know if it is obvious, but to me it seems that as a painter, like if you make a boat, do you notice that this boat's median line tends to be bent, looks to be bent?
Yeah.
It's a crooked boat. So things like that in all of these images, if you stare at it really hard, you will see some artifact that may give you a clue that, you know, that whole process of somehow shaping that noise into some meaningful or text aligned or prompt aligned image. Yeah, leaves a little bit yet to be, like some imperfections still there.
Is there a quantification for this, that imperfection, to be able to better align?
Yeah. In fact, it's a very active area of work. As you know, Mid-Journey does a better job than Stable Diffusion. Then Stable Diffusion has improved. And people have learned a whole lot of prompt engineering. Following this, there were other lots of papers like Dream Booth, etc. When you do that generative AI course, I will go into much more detail. But because in this one, we have a lot of territory to cover with LLMs, I won't go there. But in the other course, right, see, at this moment, I'm just scratching the surface. Think of it like that, it's just scratching the surface. We go pretty deep and we cover a lot of papers and we see the hows and whys of it and what has been done to make these things better. So, all right, guys, so that is that. And with that, I conclude today's paper readings, all the paper readings. Now, is there any team willing to do a presentation? Not really. So one thing I would like to do is move straight over to the Cambrian explosion event. Would you guys like to do it and finish it off? Then you'll be free and you can decide to stay or go or do whatever you want. I hope each one of you brought some ideas. I'll just stop the recording here.